All righty. All is up and running. Good morning, YouTube and X and Spaces and Rumble. All use people. Recording is rolling and you are good to go, Mr. Masters.
Okay, just have to set my timer. Okay. All right, in 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the show. It is PSYOP Friday. Yep, no. Let me start that again. Welcome to the program. David Masters here. PSYOP Day today on the show. And do you ever get the sense that everything that you're experiencing is kind of a giant PSYOP? When I watch the news and I watch these horrifyingly stupid people in government, Mayor Smiley up in where the student was killed at the university, and he's police chief, Lucy, I'm home. Oh my gosh. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached peak stupidity. I don't know how much worse it can get. But it almost reminds me of when the Soviet Union, when there was the great revolution in Russia, they took people who were unqualified to do certain things, including in the medical professions. They took them and made them janitors, and they made the janitors the surgeons and put a scalpel in their hands and told them if they didn't operate, that they would be sent to camps and killed. We got that today. I mean, and we've got obviously two different levels of that. One on the left, the other on the right. And I think even some of the people on the right are pretty feckless and pretty, I don't know, incapable of doing the job that needs to be done. But look, on the right, we have people who are at least trying to do the right thing. And on the left, we got people who have lost the ability to discern that. That's what psychosis is all about. Being psychotic means that you have lost your ability to discern the difference between right and wrong. And the left is quite mad. Can you imagine being on an aircraft with a captain who is messed up mentally and flying your aircraft? That's kind of what we had for the previous 4 years before Trump. And we have this gigantic PSYOP, psychological operation, that's been going on probably in America for many, many, many years, maybe many decades. The textbook on psychopolitics in the medical professions, where I understand that 200 people voted in Congress against a bill that would stop child genital mutilation. 200 Democrats. What's wrong with these people? What's wrong with them? So today I've got a lot of interesting reference material, I'll put it that way. And there's been a psychological operation, part of it, I believe, toward getting rid of useful people as opposed to useful idiots, right? They opened the border and they let all these people in, didn't even vet them, had no idea where they went and who they were, and 300,000 children lost to sex trafficking. I mean, it's unimaginable to me. So I will start with Dr. Robert Malone. He was the inventor of the mRNA vaccine type of material. And here's what he said back in 2023.
This was pre-planned. This whole propaganda, censorship, really, I don't know how else to say it, information warfare, psychological operation strategy that we've all been subjected to for the last 3 years. And, in the frame of when this happened, was able to grab these stories that had been posted in these various organs that we now call corporate media or state-controlled media, like the Washington Post and the New York Times, that clearly demonstrated that this was highly coordinated, and what we had just experienced was at the absolute front end, the tip of the spear, or as they like to say, the bleeding edge of the events and the strategy that would then be deployed against the entire world in a harmonized fashion. We have all been subjected over the last 3 years to military-grade psychological operations.
Yeah. Now, when he said that back in 2023, he was banned. He was actually on with, I think, Joe Rogan at the time. And this conversation about mass formation psychosis was the next conversation that got banned. I mean, hello. People are living in a psychotic condition to not be able to recognize the evil of child genital mutilation. Now, you may say, oh, in India, it's terrible what they do to young women. You may think that's terrible, genital mutilation. But here, if you're a liberal, it's progress. This is insanity. We have reached peak stupidity in this country over decades of psyop, brainwashing, dehumanization, and so on. And man, if these people ever get in charge again, where are you going to go? Where are you going to go to escape the craziness of the left? I think that the craziness of the left in this country is worse than that of the psycho politics of Russia, because somehow they have a delusion that they're doing all this for some kind of good. I mean, at least in Russia, if people had the opportunity, which who knows if they do or don't, but if they had the opportunity, they would be more like us. That's why people kind of break into our borders and try to take up residence with the good people of this country, because they see that this is maybe the last best chance that they've got to survive, the purges and the political correct retribution that you see in China and so on. We are living in a state of complete insanity, just madness. And then the shooter at the university, at Brown University, they found him in a storage unit. He had taken his own life. And they still don't have any sense of the motive. Well, I can tell you that the professor who he is alleged to have also taken out, they went to school together. Now, if you want to just take a real stretch of your imagination, one becomes a professor at MIT, and the other one is a loser. And he's looking at his life and ruminating on the idea that one of his classmates made it and he didn't. Now, I don't understand the connection to Brown University. Nobody knows that yet. Nobody understands it. But it's not a far stretch to say that the loser fixated on his classmate of some 25 or 30 years ago. Who knows how long, mid-90s. They went to school together in Portugal. So these stupid people, they know what the motives are. Well, we don't know what the motives are. Well, yes, you do. Now, with the girl, who knows? She was head of the Republican or vice president of the Republican club there on Brown University campus. Yeah, if you stand for what's right, you got a laser target painted on you somewhere, somehow. That's the truth. And yeah, that's strange times that we have, very strange times. And the left, I'm just saying, be afraid, be very afraid. These people don't care whether or not you live or die. They care only about their political and ideological agendas, and they will do anything to accomplish those agendas, and they don't care how it affects people. Now, I also have some interesting audio from the former Pfizer vice president, Michael Yaden, who talks about how this whole thing was engineered. FHU.com is where you find out more. I'll be right back. And I'll be back with these clips and more. I also have Rand Paul talking back in 2022 about the biggest cover-up in history. So I'll be right back. All right, welcome back to PSYOP session 101. Yeah, and again, this is one of the largest mass gaslights in history, in my opinion. What happened in the last 4 years before Trump was reelected, a gigantic psychological operation. And I don't, you listen, when you start to argue with people who, there's a saying, a person convinced against their will is of the same opinion still. So when a person adopts an opinion and they believe that it's true, but when they adopt an idea that is sort of programmed into them, they begin to defend it. Mm-hmm. Now, back in 2022, Rand Paul had some things to say about what was going on. Here he is.
We've been asking you, and you refuse to answer, whether anybody on the vaccine committees gets royalties from the pharmaceutical companies. I asked you last time, and what was your response? We don't have to tell you. But I tell you this, when we get in charge, we're going to change the rules, and you will have to divulge where you get your royalties from what companies. And if anybody in the committee has a conflict of interest, we're going to learn about it. I promise you that. You seem quite certain of yourself in 2004, but in 2022, there's a lot less certainty.
A vaccination following infection gives an added extra boost.
If you ignore whether they've been infected, you're ignoring a vaccine, basically. People decry vaccine hesitancy. It's coming from the gobbledygook that you give us.
Mm-hmm. The gobbledygook. Oh, Dr. Fauci. That one? Yeah. I wonder if Autopin signed his pardon. Because if it did, it should be invalidated, and that man should be properly prosecuted. Now, I'm going to play clips in between. Here comes former VP, Dr. Michael Yaden, Yeadon, Yaden. Here's what he has to say about it.
My name is Dr. Mike Yaden. I've spent my entire professional life leading research and early developments of new medicines for respiratory and skin diseases. Spent over 30 years in both big pharma and in biotech. I have a training in biochemistry and toxicology and a PhD in respiratory pharmacology. In big pharma, I was once the most senior person in Pfizer's discovery research group. I was responsible for everything to do with respiratory drugs in research and early development. After that, I founded my own biotechnology company, which I led as CEO, and ultimately was able to sell that to Novartis, a big drug company. Around that time, I also was highly sought after as a consultant to other biotech companies, and I consulted to them, advised about 30 companies over a 9-year period. So those are my credentials. I would say the professional opinion that I provide to you is that of someone who's deeply experienced in the scientific procedures and practices of creation and testing of molecules, in particular for their safety, their lack of toxicity. So my underlying training in toxicology, mechanistic toxicology, allowed me many times to detect and steer away from structural features or contents of potential medicines that could cause harm based on my wide knowledge of those things that sadly have harmed humans and animals in the past. And so it doesn't really matter if an individual like me worked in vaccines or heart disease or respiratory, because the principle, the core of my testimony is about the safety and toxicity risks of any new medicine. And it's about that that I am particularly concerned, and I have been since the middle of 2020. So I'm just going to outline maybe half a dozen points that I want you to take on board. I could give you many more, but just for brevity, and others of my expert colleagues, I think, will expand these points. The first one to know, which is shocking if you don't know this, is there was no pandemic. There was no new illness called COVID-19. What there was all of the normal human illnesses that people get. Acute respiratory illnesses like influenza are real, but we had that misattributed through incorrect diagnostic tests and told you had COVID and it was spreading. This was not true. There was a long-planned deception, and it used well-known human weaknesses, our susceptibility to fear, our credibility when authority figures tell us things, and that was misused. So no pandemic, no new illness.
Now, this goes to what Robert Malone was saying about the giant military-grade PSYOP. Was there a new illness? Dr. Michael Yaden says no, there wasn't one. So based on that idea, he will go on to explain that there was no need to introduce these kind of so-called remedies that they did introduce. And the effects of these remedies were really actually worse at some level than the problem itself, whatever it was. But you see, I was listening to this and I'm thinking to myself, okay, I, like everybody else, was concerned and at moments fearful, but I wasn't fearful enough to make the stupid decisions that many other people made, thinking that they were doing the right thing. You know, the Bible says there are ways that men think are right, but the ends thereof are destruction. I think that that applies to how things kind of play out in our lives, that there's a part of you that can warn you intuitively to say, don't follow their advice. How many times have you somehow been shown intuitively to do or not to do a thing? But if your intuition isn't working, then what do you got? You got outside influences that are helping you make your decisions. And yeah, in Australia, they just banned social media for children under 16. Good idea. But 16 still stupid. All right. Quick break. FHU.com is where you find out more. All right, welcome back. And yes, it is amazing. We have a friend on the chat, Painted Blacks. It's amazing what some people are willing to do to one another for their own personal benefit, reward of some kind. Well, yes. I mean, otherwise, why would they do it? Now, I can tell you that last night I was looking on YouTube for somebody to watch, and I stumbled on this episode of a police show in which these two teenagers executed their friend. And, oh man, with a sword, with a big, like, King Arthur type sword. Crazy stuff. Both of them were, I would have to say, like, into the dark arts. Both of these young people, 20, 21 years old. And what was uncovered in the investigation, that, you know, they tried to blame each other to escape responsibility, and then they found out that they both had participated in this horrible, horrible scheme. But again, you know, there is a time and a place where the reckoning does occur for everyone. Everyone has a reckoning. Every human being. And I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, a reckoning, come to Jesus moment or come to the truth moment. The sooner you get there, I think the better off you're going to be. And, but people that delay and put things off or play with reality, like you know, like Jordan Peterson says, what are you going to do? Twist the fabric of reality? I don't think so. And you're not going to, because it's going to snap back. Reality is not designed by you. You're just in it. And you can't twist the fabric of reality. You can delay the effects of reality for a while, but ultimately reality will catch up to you no matter what, because reality is the fabric of creation. So, yeah, I've got another Rand Paul here for you. Here he comes. I think it was 2023.
Entire pandemic, if it came from a lab, the fact that he approved the research and funded the lab would draw culpability to himself, culpability to the NIH, culpability to all of these people who made the unwise decision to send money to China to do dangerous research. So that's why they steadfastly resist this. But if you look at the early emails when they first discovered the sequence, the RNA sequence of this virus, January 31st of 2020, they are quite frightened. There's harried emails going back and forth till 2:30 in the morning. And all of the initial scientists are saying to him, holy cow, we've looked at the sequence and it looks like it's been manipulated in the lab. In fact, it has a cleavage site. This is the way the virus cleaves or gets into the cell that we don't see in nature typically, and that the Chinese last year asked us for money to do exactly that research.
So, yes. Yeah, look, there was a lot of people that were trying to sound the alarm over many years. Rand Paul was quite a champion of that. And if you think about it objectively, who in their right mind, and I want you just really to step back for a moment, who in their right mind would pardon Dr. Fauci for the horrible things that happened? I mean, I can't, there's no words for it. Why would you pardon such person? And I think Rand Paul really, among others, really showed that Fauci was key to this whole thing. That people who were in the medical industry, you know, the big pharma, and there was a documentary made that we had the one of the main characters on, called Plandemic, pretty much showed the way that these people had patented these new organisms, because you can't patent nature, but if you make something new, you can patent it and get money. So I'm just saying, here comes another clip of former Pfizer VP Michael Yaden. Here he comes.
No pandemic, no new illness. And because I worked that out, and I'm totally sure about this, I know that the people behind the so-called vaccines also knew this. Senior people, my peers in the pharmaceutical industry, also knew this. So did the regulatory agencies like FDA. So did senior figures who guide administrations in governments, and any supranational organizations like the WHO, I'm afraid, also knew this. There are two major things I want to talk about. One was the treatment of people who had this purported new illness. What they had was the normal range of illnesses that humans have always suffered from, amplified by fear. And what happened was that medical treatments in care homes of seniors, in assisted living facilities, were changed radically in 2020. And I knew this because of my underlying training, especially in respiratory diseases. I knew, for example, that treating people with opiates like morphine and sedatives like midazolam was the wrong thing to do. If you treat elderly people on their own with midazolam and morphine, which was the standard treatment for new illness, what it does is they are respiratory depressants. They've slowed the rate and depth of your breathing. And eventually, if left alone with these treatments at night while asleep, these people literally faded away and died. They were killed by their treatments. They never needed them. They were known to be inappropriate and contraindicated. If they're used together, the person has to be under active medical monitoring. That did not happen. I'm afraid my conclusion is they were murdered. I don't think the doctors who gave them these drugs early on knew that would be the consequence, but later on, I'm afraid they did, and they are culpable. In hospitals, large numbers of people were put on mechanical ventilators, you know, the kind of breathing equipment you see in the movies. I can tell you this much. I'm not a medical doctor, but I've been around pulmonologists and respiratory specialists for 40 years. You do not take a person who is walking into the hospital, able to breathe unassisted, even if distressed, who did not have a blocked airway or gunshot, knife wound, or cross injury to the chest. You do not sedate, intubate, and ventilate these people. Why? Because God and nature left you a perfectly adequate apparatus to breathe in and breathe out. If you needed extra oxygen, it would be easy to provide it with a mask or nasal cannula. In fact, that is the normal non-invasive treatment.
So this is an expert, a consultant, and when you hear him say respiratory, it's respiratory. In other words, you know what it is. But the British have their own way of explaining and saying things. So, yeah, I'm just, when I watched this, I thought, because my dad also passed during this period of time, 4.5 years ago. And the restrictions around even being able to visit him were just terrifying. A lot of people passed away in a hospital or in a room somewhere by themselves because of these restrictions that were imposed because of, it was insane. It was, again, it was a psyop. And here's Robert Malone again. Here's what he says.
This was pre-planned. This whole propaganda, censorship, really, I don't know how else to say it, information warfare, psychological operations strategy that we've all been subjected to for the last 3 years. And, in the frame of when this happened, was able to grab these stories that had been posted in these various organs that we now call corporate media or state-controlled media, like the Washington Post and the New York Times. that clearly demonstrated that this was highly coordinated, and what we had just experienced was at the absolute front end, the tip of the spear, or as they like to say, the bleeding edge of the events and the strategy that would then be deployed against the entire world in a harmonized fashion. We have all been subjected over the last 3 years to military-grade psychological operations.
Mm-hmm. Just wrap your head around that. And this, again, what the left is doing in this country. 200 in Congress voted against making a law against genital mutilation of children. Do you understand that? Do you? Who votes for these people? Who? What kind of person votes for a person who supports the mutilation of children? Those people are from hell. And you know what? You know how you... Okay, let's step back for a minute. How I determine who I want to be around is whether or not I could leave my children with them. Now, my kids are not little anymore, thank God. But you see my point. If you don't feel that you could trust a person with your kids for an hour, have nothing to do with them. Just don't. And you'll save yourself some heartache and trouble. Just saying. Pretty obvious. But you know that there's these people, birds of a feather, flock together, yeah. At ICE facilities where they try to assault the officers trying to do their job. The world has gone mad. The world has gone mad. Maybe Jesus is coming back soon. I don't know. FHU.com is where you find out more about what we do.
And you do see what's wrong, but then you think that you have your own powers to change what is wrong. But the scripture says you can't change one white hair black, or you can't add 1 inch to your height. So there are, within the framework of your private thinking, many false hopes and many false beliefs, see, conjured up by desperation and by pride and by stick and carrot teachers, and believing in the words of others who say they're inspired. And because you lack the wisdom and insight, and because they appeal to your gross base nature, and because they don't threaten you, don't threaten your ego status quo, you believe in them because they believe in you. They talk about scriptures and they talk about holy things, but they're not being holy themselves. Simply work and console your base nature. And they talk about scriptures, and they kosherize you, but they never make you, they never give you the true spirit.
Yes, that is 100% right. You trust other people. And look, I've seen hypnosis demonstrations, and it's very easy to identify the subjects who will be a part of the demonstration simply by giving them a single suggestion. I've seen it done. And the suggestion is very simple. The hypnotist will say, clasp your hands together. And, everybody in the audience will do so. And then the hypnotist will give the second suggestion. And that is, now some of you will be unable to release your hands. Right? And sure enough, there are a dozen people that are that suggestible that they can't let their hands go. Their fingers are clasped together. They can't let their fingers unlock. The power of suggestion. And this is all the devil had in the Garden of Eden. Nah, I don't believe him. He doesn't want you to know what he knows. This was a counter suggestion, by the way, from the dark, slithering one. See? So you have suggesters and you have counter suggesters. You have all kinds of suggestions going on all the time. And, if you're not aware, just enough to know that some things that you should never even entertain, the very entertainment of an idea locks you in to being a participant in the suggestion. And this is what happens and they get a hold of your children. Well, we want to give you gender affirming care as if it's a special category. And they started teaching kids years and decades ago about, sexuality and so on, to corrupt their little minds and to raise a crop of corrupted people. And this is going on today full bore. Anybody that puts their kid in a public school needs to have their head examined. My opinion. I don't care where you live or what you do. And I don't care if they have nice teachers who are good Christian people. I don't care. You have a right to take care of educating your children. That's what you should do. That's what I did. Until my kids were old enough to essentially see the difference. And then I put them in a Christian school. It wasn't much better. Honestly, the kids around in the Christian school are just as corrupt, if not more so. I'm just telling you, Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. Who are these people? Who votes for Democrats? What the hell is wrong with people who vote for Democrats? What's wrong with them? Oh, they're under a hypnotic compulsion, you say. I think I would agree with that. And this is why Jesus said, untie them, for they know not what they do. They are under a compulsion. Jesus spoke to it. The word forgive is different. If you look at the Aramaic meaning, it means to untie, to release. Release them, Father, for they know not what they do. How can you not know what you're doing? I ask you, how can you not know what you are doing? So what it essentially suggests is that you aren't in control of what you're doing. Wouldn't you agree? That you're not in control at times when people get angry or when people get overly flattered and manipulated in some way, shape, or form. People don't know what they're doing. Jesus said it 2,000 years ago. And it's more true today than ever because of mass media and mass formation psychosis and mass influences and mass mind control. Military-grade PSYOP, psychological operation, to dehumanize people to the point where they don't even have a sense of their own knowing of right and wrong. And even little children know what's right from wrong. Sometimes the littler, sometimes the more they get it, because they're still close to their origin of being created by God. I don't know how the human race survives this, to be honest with you. They're worried about AI. I'll be right back.
And so what I'm trying to get you to see here is that in order for you to have eternal life, you have to believe some very basic things. Very basic thing. You've got to start with A, and then B, and then C. And if you start with A, and then B, and then C, each one will lead to the other naturally. Now, I could take you through the A, B, C, D all the way through, but you wouldn't learn anything because I would be displacing the process you should be uncovering yourself. I found that in my own life that I learn everything by starting something and having the brains to recognize where I begin. In other words, you learn mathematics, you start with 1 + 1. You start with religion, you have to start somewhere. I haven't said where that is yet.
Yes, well, we all have to start somewhere, and most of us didn't have a great start. I don't know how many people did, honestly, because you could come from a wonderful father and or mother, or both. But the world is right there at your doorstep. And it's been that way for 100 years, 200, I don't know how long. I don't know how long that the dark forces, you've heard about Fabian socialism. That was started back in Europe. And people that used to give seances and all kinds of weird stuff. This goes back hundreds, if not thousands of years. There were people that were possessed in the days of Jesus. And in the scripture, he threw some demons into a herd of swine. And so there's no way around this idea that we are being influenced away from the light, away from common sense, away from reason. There's no way around it. It's a part of the equation that it's almost like a forbidden subject. And this is what happens when you start to tell the truth, and then these forces become fixated on you. Look what they tried to do to Trump. Look what they tried to do to RFK Jr. because he wants to make America healthy again in a real way. And anybody that's associated, Tulsi Gabbard, these people, they want to make the country functional again. And the forces, because the idea is the end game is destruction of all human beings. And so you have these people who support Palestinians, which are people too, but the cause, the Palestinian cause is to murder all the Jewish people. Who could support that? Who in their right mind? Well, the Democrats support genital mutilation of children, and they support the Palestinian whatever. Yeah, there's a man named Pierre Rehove who did a documentary on Palestine and reveals that it's a block for Iran and the hatred of Jews to destroy them. And Palestine is a proxy for Islamic jihad. That's all it is. And yes, of course, these are human beings. And yes, of course, they themselves are murdered by their own jihadis and propped up. Who would support that in a university of all places where people are supposed to be smarter? Hello? Yeah, it's a psyop. More Rand Paul here. He says this is the biggest cover-up in the history of the world. Oops, that one's not there.
So we've asked this question over and over again. Fauci and others have refused to answer any questions. They're steadfastly refusing to answer any questions, but a judge, through the Freedom of Information Act, required that they release some emails. They released them, but they blanked them all out except for the total amount of royalties. But it's not a small amount. 1,800 scientists received $193 million, but they won't tell us from which companies to which scientists. So my question is simply this, and there may be nobody on the committee that's received this money, but if they won't tell us, it makes us wonder. So on the vaccine committees, there's several committees that approve vaccines and then push forward these mandates. Is anybody on those committees receiving royalties from the 2 companies that make the vaccine, or 3 companies that make the vaccine? And if they are, they shouldn't be on the committee.
For people in respiratory distress who have unobstructed airways and no injury to the chest, you do not sedate, intubate, ventilate. If you do, this is an aggressive procedure, life-saving under certain circumstances like head injury, drug overdose, or elective surgery. But under other circumstances, what happens if you do that is it gradually produces lung injury and the person fades away, and you have to increase the pressure day after day in the pump until they die of what's called adult respiratory distress syndrome. So that's the second way in which people were wrongly treated, because top-down medical protocols for COVID-19 that didn't exist were known by people like me to be harmful and ultimately lethal. And finally, in hospitals, people were given ineffective drugs that were known to be dangerous. And the classic one is remdesivir. Nurses on clinic started to call this drug run death is near after a while. And that's because remdesivir, if given persistently, kills people. So I hope I've outlined to you there was no acute public health crisis, and the treatments given to people with these alleged illnesses, which were other illnesses, were wrong. They were bad treatments in care homes and hospitals. The really important thing I need to tell you about, because this comes from the core of my training and then decades of application of looking for potential toxic vulnerabilities in a medicine. It was in the core of my training to look out for molecules and components that were picked up for good reasons to accomplish some medicinal aim, but might have toxic liabilities. When I describe to you 3 things about these so-called vaccines that I know as a professional from this industry that gave birth to them must axiomatically cause injury or be known to be risks, I could pick others, but there are 3 that I know to be true from the heart of my being in training. The first one is, we were told that these molecules were gene sequences that encoded something called spike protein. The spike protein, we were told, was on the outside of this virus. Now, I don't agree with that, but this is what we were told, a cartoon like a spear with spikes coming out of it. We were told these vaccines encoded the protein, the spike protein that sat on the outside of these viruses. And this would train your immune system to fight it off. Ladies and gentlemen, is a really important concept in immunology.
So Dr. Yaden lays out this idea that these things were being manufactured, spike proteins and whatever. Very interesting to consider that you are nothing more to these people than a useless eater, that you're breathing precious air, that somehow you're taking up too much space, that you have a fingerprint, carbon fingerprint of some sort. These people have been given and programmed themselves. Again, this is why Jesus said, forgive them, release them, for they know not what they do. They don't even know what they think. And if you don't know what you think, you will not know what you're doing. You'll just, listen, Jordan Peterson did an amazing series on Nazi occupation, where they rounded up people and put them in mass graves. And he describes the indifference that they had toward the humans that they were eliminating. They go home and have dinner with their family, sit down and pleasant to their own children and so on. But the other people were not even thought of as human. That's how these elite psycho operatives see all of you. They are only interested in themselves. And so FHU.com is where you find out more about what we do. I'll be right back.
But there's always a beginning spot. And if you could perceive, if you have enough sense to perceive it, theoretically, you wouldn't need to go to school to become a great mathematician. As a matter of fact, there are many great writers who perceive the principles of writing, and art who perceive the principles of art, and scientists who perceive the workings of the atom quite naturally. And they don't go to school and achieve far more than those who do. Because those who go to school, technically speaking, of course, there are some people that go to school would never learn anything unless they went to school. And they got all knowledge and no common sense. I'm not saying that a great majority of people would have to go to school, because unless they went, they didn't have the brains to see it for themselves. They have to be taught. But we're all taught from God. And so there's not a single thing that you couldn't learn that once you put your mind to it, if it has any use to the service of your Creator. And that's the difference between us and them.
It means education to bring forth from within. But when you program people through education, and this is what's been done to the people who are trying to rule the world, they've been programmed in many strange ways, given special seals of approval from governments and so on. And then they've been installed in places where they are obedient servants to those who installed them. And I honestly, I don't know how the human race survives unless Jesus returns or something miraculous happens, which could happen. Could happen. But see, they've already done their experiment. They've already eliminated millions of people through various means. We talk about, the problem of fentanyl. And Trump is, properly waging war against the drug distributors and so on. But okay, so let's say, 100,000 people here and 100,000 people there. When millions of people are dying every day from improper diagnosis and treatment of various conditions. You see? And everybody knows that the medical system is broken. Yes, it's the best one that we've got, no doubt about it. We got great doctors and great technicians, but do they really know what they're doing? Do they? Yeah, I think it's just, honestly, sometimes it's only by a miracle that people survive. That's all I'm saying. So here comes another clip of Dr. Robert Malone.
Anybody that has any credentials as a retrovirologist knows of this enzyme. The Nobel Prize was awarded to David Baltimore for it. And Rudy Yanish showed very early in the outbreak that you could get this phenomena of reverse transcription of RNA into DNA. There's also another pathway for doing this, which has to do with formation of triple helix. So the RNA can kind of wrap itself around the DNA double helix or an open DNA single strand and influence the replication of the DNA and cause that to then incorporate these sequences. The key question is it clinically relevant? Does this happen often enough to be associated with clinical disease? And if it does, the place you're most likely to find it is in oncology, in the development of cancers, tumor cells.
It's taught to every person who has a training in immunology, as I did, in the first lesson. What allows your body to treat itself kindly, but to go to war if something untoward is discovered in your body? And the concept is this: self, non-self, or foreign. My body is healthy right now. My immune system that is surveilling all parts of my body is at peace with itself, because everything it encounters is known to it to belong to my Eden, itself. If you inject me with a gene sequence that will make my body manufacture a foreign protein that isn't me, that is a viral protein, my body, every cell in my body that follows that instruction will signal to my immune system that I have been attacked. And my immune system goes to war and attacks and kills every cell that complied with that instruction. And that is what has happened, ladies and gentlemen, to every cell in every tissue, in every person who has been thus injected. The toxicity that you would experience varies tremendously, because some people would take it up efficiently, copy it efficiently, make the protein for a long time. I'm afraid those people are mostly dead. Other people took it up poorly, transcribed it poorly and only briefly, and those people are alive. And then there's every continuity in between. But that point, that if you inject an instruction that makes your body make a foreign protein that is not self, your immune system will attack it. Ladies and gentlemen, you know this. This is the principle of tissue matching in organ transplantation. This is the principle behind failed tissue transplant, organ rejection. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the basis behind autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and many others, and neurological diseases where your body destroys itself. That is the first principle that was designed into every company's molecule: Moderna, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca. So I knew by the middle of 2020, these were designed to cause injury. How much I didn't know, I still don't completely know. But this expert is telling you that.
So, yes, and just think about it. We were told, well, if you get your immunization, that will prevent you from becoming sick and infecting others. What a perfect cover. Wouldn't you think? You take this, and this renders you invulnerable, and also stops you from spreading it to your grandmother. Yeah. Trust but verify is what Ronald Reagan said. Now, we had these people like Rand Paul who were telling us, and others, many others, including Michael Yaden, who started talking about this 5 years ago. But who cares? Because, I got my MTV and I got my Netflix and I got my nice car, or, I got places to be and things to do. And man, a lot of people lived and thought that way. All right, quick break. FAQ.com is where you find out more, and I'll be right back.
That you couldn't be revealed as you took the first step. The other would be revealed to you. 1 + 1 makes 2. You can create your own symbols, as long as we understand each other about what those symbols mean. Because that's what would be necessary to communicate with the world you live in. If you're an Arab, you need it in Arabic. You need the symbols of Arabic. You could create your own symbols, but only you would understand it. So it would be necessary to do some learning, how words sound and what words mean. And when you think with those words, you think with different meanings. And you think yourself into a next dimension. You think yourself right into the next level. 1 + 1 makes 2. Well, obviously 2 + 1 makes 3. But there are some people who have to be taught that. Because if you didn't tell it to them, they wouldn't know it. I remember my rabbi teaching me a class about thou shalt not commit murder. When I stopped and I said, I pulled them aside afterwards. Must have been 7, 8, or 9 years old. So why are you teaching me this? I know that already. He said, you couldn't know that because you couldn't know that unless I taught you. I said, well, who taught you? The very type of person that was in the garden, the very type of snake-like serpentine quality that gave them this nature, this puffed up nature, puffed up with knowledge, that misled them and brought them down to being less of a human being, thinking it's going to be more of a human being. And so these people go back like drug addicts. They go back to those same types. And they elect them as experts. And they put them on pedestals. And they are icons. and they're idols. And these idols lead them and massage into them what they want to hear. And they keep buying it and learning and believing they're wonderful when they're not wonderful, and God loves them when they're not, when God doesn't love them. It's not the God that our God that loves them, it's another God that loves them the way they are. It's an evil God.
And that also has been long known. So any of these folks that deny that this could happen are not on solid scientific ground. And usually the ones that are making these statements have no solid scientific training, because anybody who does have knowledge in this area and training knows that this is a well understood and accepted phenomena.
That they were designed to cause injury. The second really important point to tell you about is what was encoded in these gene-based vaccines, alleged vaccines, is spike protein. I didn't know what spike protein was. It was new to me, but it's the spikes on the outside of this alleged virus that I don't think is real. I could find proteins like it, and I found all of them were known to be toxins like neurotoxins, cardiotoxins, and things that would prompt blood coagulation. So again, the question, why would you encode in your helpful medicinal product something that when expressed in your body would harm you? That's the second thing. There is a third one, which is when I discovered it late in 2020 or early 2021, I have to say I cried. Two of the products made by Pfizer and Moderna were formulated. Every medicine is formulated. You'll be familiar with a tablet. It might be film coated or dry. It might be a capsule of various sizes. It could be a liquid for injection, an inhaler. All of these, you have the active principle, but it's surrounded and protected with something that helps it do its work, hopefully beneficial work. Two of these products were wrapped in something called lipid nanoparticles, or LNPs. Lipid is fat, nano means tiny, particle means little blobs. So they were wrapped in lipid nanoparticles, and I looked them up. And I thought, oh, that's quite interesting. They had been used before in certain oncology drugs. But here was the thing, as a toxicologist, when I started researching, I thought, these things are known to be toxic. And the further I explored, here is the shocking thing. Lipid nanoparticles, every one of them tested, is known to promote the uptake of their payload, whatever they were protecting, into the organs inside your abdomen, what's called the visceral organs, and most prominently liver and your ovaries. So, ladies and gentlemen, the person who picks lipid nanoparticles to formulate these materials knew professionally that when it was injected into women and girls, this material would travel around their body and concentrate in their reproductive organs. And then it would do those two things I just described. It would be expressed and your body would recognize it as foreign and kill those cells. It would, when expressed, cause toxicity directly to those cells. And I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, what possible motivation could you have for doing that when you could have picked half a dozen other means of protecting the drug? And I have to say, at that point, I knew deeply in my heart that the first two observations I made weren't just like mistakes or things they would ride the risks. These three things together told me someone got in a room, someone like me, and said, Dr. Yeadon, design injections that will injure, kill, and reduce fertility in the people you give it to.
Isn't it clear that what they're really after, if that is all true, I have no way to know, but isn't it pretty obvious that they were after a potential mother of a potential Jesus type person? Yeah. I mean, isn't that pretty clear that the motive was to stop from producing another godly person that might lead the human race towards some kind of salvation or truth that sets them free? Isn't it really what it's all about? Really boils down to the mass formation opposing the awakened, the mass formation of darkness, let's put it that way, opposed to the people of the light. Because there's only two kinds of people, hate to tell you. has nothing to do with any kind of social conditions or skin colors or all that. You know that, though. They try to divide you along every single possible line that they can. Everything, haves and have-nots, skin color this, gender that. That's all they've got. They've only got divide and conquer. That's all they got. They got nothing else. And so if they can't divide you, then they'll find ways to put the enemy on the inside. You know, the kind of food. I mean, RFK Jr. is against this extremely highly processed foods. And, you know, the industries that produce this vile garbage stand to lose money. Think about it objectively. 100 years ago, everybody pretty much ate from a garden. Really. You know, you pretty much had to have your own garden, kind of like people who live in rural areas of China and other similar types of environments. Everybody's got to have their own garden. They got to grow their own food. See, but yeah, it's clear, and you can't do anything other than recognize it. And when you recognize it, maybe out of that sprouts an idea for freedom. Something like that. Maybe just recognizing the truth, knowing the truth that sets you free, brings rise to a sprout of something good. Who knows? But they're going to get you. And they're not even going to get you. They're going to design various ways, so many of them that you'll never even know what got you. Right? Until you're gone, until you've been got. And even maybe then you won't know. Yes, it is an extermination of God's creation. And human beings are the closest thing. Not animals, but the human race are the closest thing to God in this world, because we have an eternal spark called a soul. It is inextinguishable. Know that now. Guard it. Honor it. Honor God that gave it to you. I don't care where you're from or what your background has been. The minute you start to embrace and acknowledge the source from where you came, it starts to change the dynamic. That's right. It starts to change the dynamic. Know ye not that ye are the temple of the living God, and that his spirit dwells within? Know you not that? You are the temple of the living God. Don't you get that? Yet? Yeah, I know people that listen to this and other similar types of shows do, but it can also be an intellectual concept. You know, I am made by God. All these phony country club Christians. You know, I'm perfectly made and God loves me the way I am. Come on. You got some growing to do. You got growing to do. And you know it. And you know, that's why I am very careful not to make assumptions about me. I'm not worthy. Any of us worthy? Were we worthy for Christ's sacrifice? No. No, not a single one of us. None of us were worthy. None of us will be ever worthy. But he did it anyway. And to honor that and to value that changes the dynamic between you and your originator, your creator. Know ye not that ye are the temple of the living God, and that his spirit dwells within? Not made by human hands, not genetically modified in the laboratory, not a clone. Well, in a way you are, but you're a unique clone. That's an oxymoron, isn't it? But you are. You're a clone of mom and dad. and given a unique opportunity to go into the world and bring some of God's light with you. That's it. Go into the world, bring some of God's light, spread it around, share it with whoever will hear, and then fear not. Or either that, or be afraid, be very afraid, because the dark side will try to find a way to get you. Yeah, we all know that. But, yeah. Be still and know that I'm God, he said at FHU.com. Be still and know. I'll be right back.
And so these people go that way, and these people are getting some kind of salvation. But it isn't a salvation, it isn't a true salvation. It is a salvation from salvation. The ego is kept being preserved. And therefore Jesus said, who preserves his life shall lose it. Whoever shall preserve his ego, animal life, that's what it, and breath, that's what the translation actually means. In Greek, there are two words for life. One is susheo and zoe. Zoe, we get our word zoo from. Zoe. Whoever shall preserve his zoe life. The English only has one word for life, so it doesn't make sense when you only use that one word. But you put it back to the Greek, it makes sense. Who shall preserve his ego, animal, life and breath, shall lose the suche, life and breath. Who shall lay down his ego, animal, life and breath, shall pick up the spiritual suche, life and breath.
Again, what I emphasize is that we need to recognize that just because something can happen doesn't mean that it does happen at a sufficient frequency to cause clinical disease. The flip side is we can't rule out that it doesn't, because the pharmaceutical industry did not do its job and the FDA did not insist on its doing its job and characterizing what's called genotoxicity, which is a standard set of assays that would be done to rule out this kind of phenomena. And for some reason, the FDA elected to apply the vaccines checklist as opposed to the gene therapy checklist. And here we are still speculating about something that should have been well understood long before these products were administered to billions of humans.
And design it so that it won't kill everybody, it won't injure everybody, but if we give it to enough people over time, it will lower the fertility in their health and reduce population. And this is what I have watched happen all around me for 5 years since that moment. I've been speaking out and warning of this for 5 years. What I've just told you, I did not make it up after the fact. I wrote these things down in December 2019, and along with a German doctor, Wolfgang Wodarg, we put them in writing and sent them to the European Medicines Agency, the second most consequential regulatory agency in the world. We sent it to Emma Cook, who was in charge of the EMA. She did not even reply. The day after we published this open letter, I was removed from all social media. The day after, I was attacked by the main UK broadcasting agency, the BBC, who started calling me a conspiracy theorist and a purveyor of misinformation. So my ability to reach out to people was cut down by 99% from that day. Meanwhile, I was paraded on Radio 4. There was a Woman's Hour program that named me as a misinformation spreader. And guess what the official from the government, guess where they came from? They came from the Royal College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, and they defended these injections and said, ladies and gentlemen, don't listen to this guy, this conspiracy theorist. Listen to me. These are safe and effective and essential to protect your health and that of your unborn child. And I can't remember the name of this lady because they have scrubbed the interview. But I have to say at that point, I decided I wasn't going to get mad. I was I was going to get even. And I have been speaking out without fear ever since. And if you believe anything I have told you, I say to you, you have a duty to repeat whatever chimed with you the most so the next person you can tell. The worst that will happen is if I'm wrong, the worst that's going to happen is you're going to get laughed at, which is no big deal, is it? But if I'm right and you don't say anything, you're going to lose your freedom and then you're going to lose your life. That's really all I have to say to you, Judge, and this is my testimony.
And so the other thing is the reverse transcription, which is the paper you mentioned. That was truly amazing because they had these liver cancer cells, and they grew in vitro. They had them in culture in vitro, and they basically transfected them with the spike protein, like essentially gave them the vaccine, you could say. And they took up the mRNA from the nanoparticles, and they made spike protein. But they took the mRNA and turned it into DNA very quickly. They after 6 hours, they started seeing DNA, a DNA version of the RNA that was in the vaccine, which is really remarkable because you see these fact checkers who say, ha ha ha, these people are saying that this RNA can get converted into DNA in the cell. No way, that doesn't happen. Don't worry about it. These guys showed it happens in 6 hours with cancer cells.
So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. I felt a responsibility to share with you what Dr. Michael Yaden said. And I know that it's not a hot topic these days, what Dr. Fauci and the evil ones did. But, it's funny because I thought, we don't even hear about AIDS anymore. You notice that? AIDS was all we ever heard about. For years and years and years and years, we don't hear about it anymore. And we don't hear about, the things that happen to people, older people especially, and the things that happen to children. And the myocarditis, yeah, it was a big deal for a while. Now it's not so much. They'll just distract you from one thing to the next. So, on this program, I will try to be obedient to my conscience and share with you the things that I think have value. And you listen to your conscience and you share with others what you feel and believe has value. And that's how the world changes, one person at a time. Now, for you who are listening, please don't forget, this is the time of year that helps us determine what we can do in the next year. Your tax-deductible donations for FHU.com, you can write us at P.O. Box 1000, Grants Pass, Oregon, 97528, or you can go to FHU.com and make a donation like my friend Frank did. A very, very kind donation, Frank. Thank you. And many others. Those of you who have supported FHU, thank you so much. FHU.com.
Okay.
I did miss two references to COVID in the first clip of the doctor.
Yeah, I heard him. Yeah,
not a big deal. I mean, it's not me talking, it's him, but
yes, that makes little difference to YouTube. Okay, goodbye, streamers. Have a good day.